Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you're watching me from. My name is Dr. Obi Oramba Iboweze, reaching you from Nkolo Mahadum, Wisdom University. Today's date is Oye Market Day in the 8th month of the Igbo lunar calendar called Onwa Ilomo, and in the Roman Catholic calendar, today's date is September 24, 1924. At Nkolo Mahadum Wisdom University, we encourage you to always use your God naturally given common sense, which we call Ako Nuche in Igbo language, to evaluate all the information you are getting every day and determine which one to follow. Don't just follow things because you hear it from this place or that place. And that's why we are here to redirect you to use your akonuche, your common sense, to evaluate every information you are getting. We at Nkolo Mahadum is strongly in support of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, who is fighting for the freedom of his people. He's calling for referendum, is not calling for war, and he should be released from DSS confinement, solitary confinement immediately, because he has committed no crime. And remember, at Nkolo Mahadum, we present issues from Biafran and African perspectives, so that you see things from how it is affecting you in the world. Don't be jumping up and down, celebrating what is benefiting other cultures and other nations and other people. Celebrate things that affect you and raise up your voice when things are against you, as we have found out with everything going on around the world, that many things are screwed to disfavor, to unfavor we Africans. And most importantly, please share this lecture to your friends and well-wishers. Nkolo Mahadum is an university set up for you, so that you do critical thinking before you make any decision. Always think. Don't just follow things because you had it from here or there. The title of today's lecture is Africans are demanding for immediate reform of the United Nations to benefit all nations. Africans are demanding for immediate reform of the United Nations so that all nations can benefit. And we have to begin by giving you a brief history of the United Nations. The United Nations was founded in October 1945. And the first session of the Assembly convened on January 10th, 1946 in London with 51 countries. As of 2015, there were 193 members of the United Nations and 2 recognized independent nations, the Vatican City and Palestine. So you have 193 members with two independent recognized nations, the Vatican City and Palestine. The United Nations moved to the permanent headquarters in New York at the start of the 7th session on October 14th, 1952. And since then, majority of the meetings, sessions were always held in New York. And does nations make payment to belong to the United Nations? The answer is yes. Even though admission is voluntary, but have to be recommended by a nation already a member. A one-time payment that they make is due by the end of every February of any given year. So at the end of every February, every member are expected to pay up their dues. And as of today, 139 countries have paid their dues to the United Nations. As of today, out of 193, 139 countries have paid their dues. And they've been having this meeting every year. They convene in that meeting. Every year, they are there in that meeting. And we have had several African leaders, not only Africa, but because also a leader like Saddam Hussein of Iraq, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, and Robert Mugabe. These are leaders that have come consistently at the United Nations to ask for reform of the system so that every nation will benefit. And if you remember last year, Africans spoke loudly at the United Nations. Countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Kenya, Nigeria, and others, they spoke loudly at the United Nations, like they never did before. Because each time you speak against what is going on, they see you as an enemy. Once you say you want to reform, they see you as an enemy. Who are seeing you as an enemy? Those that you know that formed the United Nations. Like we have always presented to you, those that formed the United Nations in the two previous lectures, United States, UK, France, China, and Russia. They are in charge of the United Nations. They are the ones that have permanent membership and veto power. So they don't want any complaint. They want to maintain the status quo. And that is why we at Nkola Mahadum Wisdom University, we are supporting all people around the world that wants equality of all human race, to ask that the United Nations have to be reformed. We are joining all people around the world, all Africans, to stand up and ask for immediate reform of the United Nations. How can 5 countries have permanent membership and veto power while the rest don't have it? How can Africa, with 1.4 billion people, don't have any voice in the United Nations? And now they're talking about giving us only 2 slots. Only 2 slots for 1.4 billion people, while countries like France and UK, which have roughly about between 64 to 65 million people, have permanent membership and veto power at the United Nations? We have concluded at this Mahadum Wisdom University that that is not fair. Africa with 1.4 billion people are only about to be given only 2 slots with no veto power. And how about India? India with about 1.4 billion people as well don't have no permanent membership at the United Nations. And other nations too. All the nations in the Middle East. None of them have permanent membership. And that's why we are supporting the call for reform of the United Nations. Our elder statesman, Robert Mugabe, before he died, he has consistently requested that the United Nations should be reformed. Reform the United Nations. That's the way he said it. Reform the United Nations. Reform the United Nations. Nkola Mahadum Wisdom University is supporting that call to reform the United Nations. Because as it is today, Africans are at a loss. And also, the United Nations have consistently failed to stop all the wars going on in the world. Look at the war in Ukraine. After the last 2023 General Assembly, United Nations General Assembly, after the 2023 United Nations General Assembly, what did they achieve? They can't even stop the Ukraine war. Now the Israeli war has started. The one in Sudan is going on. The one in Syria, and so many other wars going on around the world. The United States, the United Nations so far is a failure. The way it's presently constituted and being managed is a failure. Because it's always war this, war that, every time fighting, killing human beings, destroying human properties, and that should stop right there. Where? And Nkola Mahadum is advocating that the United Nations have to be reformed to be more inclusive, to give Africa more say, to stop all the wars going on around the world. We need more peaceful world. And with this, we shall be bringing today's lecture to an end. But before we end it, the takeaway from today's lecture is that the United Nations, which began in 1945 and having their 79th session in New York, which started on Tuesday, should be reformed right away. Africans are asking for immediate reform of the United Nations because the way it is presently constituted with the 5 permanent members who are the founders and with veto power, it's not inclusive. It's a master-servant relationship. And those who are asking for reform should not be called enemies. Everybody should be given equal opportunity. And Africa with 1.4 billion people should have more say and more representative at the United Nations. And all these wars around the world should stop right now. You cannot have a working United Nations and you have all these wars going on. Human beings are being killed every day. Look at the bombing in Lebanon the other day by Israel. Look at how many people that were killed. Look at all the wars going on. It need to stop. We cannot have a successful United Nations without stopping all these wars around the world and giving everybody equal opportunity in the world. It is very, very, very important. And with this, we shall be bringing today's lecture to an end. But before we end it, Nkola Mahadum is saying again that we are in solidarity with Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. He should be released from DSS custody. He never committed any crime. And asking for referendum is not asking for war. It is our fundamental human right to ask for that. And again, all Africans should stand up to dismantle all the colonial boundaries in Africa, because if we Africans cannot go to Europe and say, you are this country, you are that country, we should say no to all these artificial boundaries that have divided brothers against brothers in Africa and included enemies together in one geographical area, should be disbanded so that our people can be free for prosperity and equality. And with this, we shall be bringing today's lecture to an end. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Obiora Mba. Thank you for joining us.